Welcome to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. I'm Michael Grosvenor.
And I'm Jack Fernino. Join us as we dig deep into Billy Joel's songs and history and what his music has meant to us.
What changes when other piano players perform Billy Joel's music? What elements shine through? What's it like to be tasked with performing music written by one of the most popular recording artists of the 20th century?
This is the second installment of our two-part series where we talk with piano players who have been tasked with interpreting and performing Billy's music. Previously, we spoke with Michael Cavanaugh, who led the pit band through hundreds of performances of the hit Broadway production Movin Out.
This time, we're speaking with Hyung-ki Joo, the classical pianist and comedian who arranged and performed the recordings on 2001's Fantasies and Delusions.
Join us for the second installment of our two-part series, where we dig deep into the music of Billy Joel with musicians who've learned and interpreted these pieces.
As Jack and I geared up for this episode, and more specifically the conversation with Hyung-ki, I really didn't know what to expect. Historically, I've mostly been familiar with Hyung-ki on the periphery. I was certainly aware and familiar with Fantasies and Delusions. The album came out when I worked at Sony. I, had listened to the album on and off over the years. It's not an album I go back to as much as the pop records, admittedly. And I'm familiar with the comedic duo that we'll get into a little bit. But I really didn't know the nuts and bolts of how his career got together, his relationship with Billy Joel, and, where he's at today. So it was a real treat learning a lot about him.
Yeah, I spent a couple years as a community journalist prior to this podcast, and I did a handful of really great interviews with a lot of local people in and around Philadelphia, but especially Ted Rundgren, Maceo Parker, and a few others. And Maceo Parker and a couple people I spoke with were such powerful interviews, and this goes in like that top 5 for me, where just the interview itself was like a powerful experience where as an interviewer, I'm hanging on the edge of my seat for dear life because the person I'm interviewing or speaking with, in this case, Michael and I are speaking with, have such control over the moment that you're terrified that like whatever you're going to say next is just going to ruin the vibe that they've created. And you're kind of stuck between trying to enjoy this like really magical moment and making sure it moves along smoothly. It's been a long time since I was really that far on the edge of my seat during a conversation, and this was definitely one. He really played the conversation like a piano. When he wanted it to be light and funny, it was light and funny. When he wanted to like stop time and make a point, time stopped and he made a point. It was really great. Just doing the interview itself was fantastic.
You and I may have been the interviewers, but I really felt like he was the conductor. We always have our list of questions that we want to make sure we hit on and bring up. And Hyung-ki was so intuitive that, gosh, he probably tapped into a good half dozen of them before we even got around to bringing them up. That's how in tune he was to the conversation and the direction things were going.
I'd like to say he played us like a fiddle, but he's the piano player of the duo. So with that in mind, there's a couple of quick background pieces on Hyung-ki Joo. Currently, along with his own performances and compositions, he's one half of the classical comedy duo Lee Goodsman and Joo. He plays the piano and Lee Goodsman is a violin player, so he plays the fiddle. And just to clear up any misconceptions, if you bought a copy of Fantasies and Delusions when it came out, you'll know, of course, that the cover says the music was performed by Richard Joo. Richard and Hyung-ki are the same person. He went by Hyung-ki for a long time, switched over to Richard for a while around Fantasies and Delusions, and has since gone back to being referred to as Hyung-ki. So if you look on Spotify now, or if you purchase a digital copy of the album, you'll see that the cover now says Hyung-ki Joo, and yes, it is the same person. But as they say in Spinal Tap, hey, enough of my yakking.
We hope you dig it as much as we had fun doing it. So let's get into our conversation with Hyung-ki Joo.
Hyung-ki, thanks so much for speaking with us today.
It's a pleasure. Am I actually in a glass house? Are we in a glass house?
A great existential question, right? So before we get into the album, for people who aren't familiar with you, can you tell us about your work prior to Fantasies and Delusions?
I am essentially a classical pianist and composer. So I was just doing the traditional trajectory of a classical musician, which is I went to a school called the Yehudi Menuhin School, then studied in New York at the Manhattan School of Music. So was pretty much set on trying to somehow, fulfill the role of a classical pianist, a classical composer. Before I met Billy, I had a fair amount of performing experience and had composed a few things, but my professional career as such had not really taken off. So the things that I'd done were limited for sure.
How then did you end up coming to work on the album?
I was living in Vienna between 93 and 95. Billy's brother, Alexander Joel, is a phenomenal conductor, classical conductor, and he was studying here in Vienna. And we just became very, very good friends. He's really one of my best friends. And I think, yes, in 94, Billy was on tour with River of Dreams, and he performed at the Vienna Stadthalle. And of course, thanks to Alex, we all got tickets. And of course, I was familiar with who Billy was. Growing up as a child in the 70s, that's part of the sort of the soundtrack to the 70s, Don't go changing. So I certainly knew who he was, but my field was classical music. So my great heroes were, Bernstein and Menuhin and so forth. It didn't really interest me so much to meet a rock star, more the fact that I'm meeting Alex's brother. After the show, we went to the Sacher Hotel where Billy was staying, and it was just a very small group of us. That's when I first met Billy and started talking with him, and that's when I realized this guy is not a rock star. He is someone who is incredibly passionate about classical music. This is his real love. And it was ironic because having seen this guy just a few hours earlier for 3 hours performing music, which was ear splitting, not him, not his music, but just because being in that sort of environment. I think it was the first time I was in a sort of rock audience environment in a stadium. I'm used to hearing a Beethoven symphony or a Brahms quartet, it's like, what the fuck? And at that time he was still like doing, somersaults off the piano and being quite acrobatic. So real rock star, show. And then here he is sitting in the bar. It's just us. And he's like, so tell me about Beethoven. And do you know this thing by Schumann? And why did Schubert do this? And do you know that bit in the Pathetique that goes like this? And I was like, what? This guy knows more about classical music than a lot of my colleagues and peers and students. I was like, who is this guy? I mean, this is unbelievable. Of course, we stayed up drinking till about 5 o'clock in the morning. And I would say 98% of the conversation was just about classical music. And I remember just going away feeling like electric, because it's so rare, believe it or not, that you meet someone who is so passionate about the music that you love yourself. And I would even go so far as to say, not only did he know more than a lot of my colleagues, but I think that his passion for classical music would put a lot of my colleagues to shame. So that was my introduction to Billy.
It's amazing how he's always come across to me too as like a historian. He loves learning and soaking up information, whether it be world history, U.S. history, and music. I think he got pegged early on as just a certain type of guy, but it's incredible how you describe how well-versed he is in classical music and so many other genres as well.
If you ever have the opportunity to go to his home, you'll see that the soundtrack to his home is Beethoven. He has the Beethoven radio channel on the entire time.
No kidding.
Probably he has it on when he sleeps as well. I don't know, but I mean, it's on in the toilet. It's on everywhere. And so, that's really his passion.
And was he working on any of those pieces when you first met him?
I think he was. He definitely very hard to say, to codify what working is, but I think he definitely had strains. And I think he already knew back then that he wanted to leave behind the world of singer-songwriter and go into the world of writing music that would pay homage to the masters that he really admired ever since his childhood. And I think that's why he was asking all those questions as well. And wait, that was 94. So it was only 2 years later. I think 2 years later was the next time that I saw him in person. And I think already then he had some snippets, let's say, under his fingers. Mm-hmm. And he would play them to me and say, you know, I've just come up with this, and this is the kind of music I want to write now. What do you think? You know, I come from, I was born in England, but my parents are from Korea, and funnily enough, I also look Korean. And, I have this sort of very traditional Asian parent background where sort of, you know, you must tell truth. You must be honest. You know, most important thing is integrity. This is man personality, is integrity, character. So, you know, I was never really guided or taught to like maybe to speak diplomatically or, you know, offer lip service or just, you know, sugar top things. So here was, you know, super famous rock star Billy Joel asking me for my opinion on his latest snippets. And I just answered him very honestly and said, well, that's not very good. And this you're just stealing this from Chopin. And I mean, that's, you know, there's no counterpoint here. And, you know, what's with your left hand? And he must have felt like shooting me or something. I mean, it must have been taunt. But I think my honesty was actually in the end the thing. And of course he realized that I was speaking with also with certain expertise, that I wasn't just bullshitting, that I knew what I was talking about. I think that must have somehow impressed him, that first of all that I was willing to be honest with him, and secondly that the information that I was sharing with him could be useful to him. And so I think that over the next few years, whenever we would meet, he would feel comfortable to trust me with his newest whatever sketches. Mm-hmm. And in 1999, around March, April, I guess, I was going to have my Carnegie Recital Hall debut in New York City. And I knew that he had written one piece, Soliloquy. That was one of the pieces that I had heard in little snippets over the years. Someone had already notated it, and I think someone had already performed it in Tanglewood or something like this. So I knew about this. I called him up and I said, listen, I've got my New York recital debut coming up, and I would love to premiere your piece, give it a New York premiere, and also sandwich it with people like Beethoven and Prokofiev and Ravel, and give it the legitimacy that I feel it deserves. And also, you know, it'll be great for me. I mean, you know, fantastic to have the honor of doing that. He fortunately said, yeah, sure, go for it. And gave me his blessing to do it. And he came to that concert, heard me play it. And very shortly afterwards, he called me up and said, listen, I think you really understand my music. I love the way you play it, but I think you also understand what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to do. And would you be interested in notating and helping me to craft all these handful of pieces that I have swelling in my head and eventually record them? And I said, let me think about this. No, I said, of course, I'd be honored. So I think it was like a two-year quite intensive working process, because we recorded the album in 2001. I think he called me around June 1999, and then I got working straight away. And then I think all 10 pieces, and there were some other pieces actually that didn't make it on the album, like a piece called Elegy, the Great Piconic, which later he orchestrated. So I worked on all those pieces for about, the next 18 months or something like that.
Thinking back to how you were mentioning how you would give him the criticism and share your thoughts throughout the process of him working on these pieces, I'm hearing parallels in my head with the relationship he used to have with Liberty DeVito, his drummer. These guys were with him before he became Billy Joel, so they weren't afraid to tell him, if a lyric was terrible, a melody was a rehash of somebody else's songs, they were going to tell him right away. And so I think that's something he needs in a creative partner, someone who's not afraid to speak up like you did.
Well, one of the great things about Billy that I'm sure you've somehow felt is that he's an extremely humble and modest person. Never in all the years that I've known him has he ever bragged or come across as someone who thinks highly of himself or his achievements. If anything, the opposite. He usually thinks that what he just did is crap, regardless of whether it's a classical piece or a song. I know a lot of the songs that he wrote that are some of the greatest hits. At the time, he was ready to just kick them in the trash. And I think Just the Way You Are, he was like,
right,
this is crap, and that that won the Grammy and everything. So there's a lot of stuff that he will make fun of even today. He's a great stand-up, as you know, and when he self-deprecates himself and some of the songs he's written, how he did it and stuff, it's hilarious. But that's the way he really is. Somewhere he knows he's good, of course. He's an incredibly naturally gifted musician. He's an incredibly talented musician. But he's very well aware of what he doesn't know, and he's not afraid to. He doesn't need to hide it. He's very open about it. So I think whether it's Liberty or whether it's me or whoever it is, would come across and share a view that has some credibility, he's always open to it and always listening.
You had mentioned that someone else had notated soliloquy. As he was writing these, was he notating these as he went, or was it more of a rock and roll situation where he would write it and keep tinkering with it at the piano, as opposed to just writing it out?
Well, fortunately for me, Billy can't notate. That's why one of the reasons why I got the job is, although he can read music, and of course, he started training as classical pianist. So of course at some point in his early life he could notate and whatever, but he's just out of practice. So he wouldn't know where to begin. So thankfully that's where I could step in. So there were many ways we worked. Sometimes it would just be probably because he couldn't be bothered to come into the city or for me to go over there, or he was too busy. He would just lay something down on a tape, and then it would just get sent over to me. These days before the internet. So, it would arrive in a package. And then I would listen to the tape and then start notating and then arrange and make it into what I think that he wanted. Then either we would meet in person and I would play to him what I've done, or I would send him a tape back. And then we'd get on the phone, he would tell me this and this. There were many ways that we worked. This was the years before Skype and whatever. So it was really just either meeting in person or phone calls or throwing tapes around.
Because he wrote that way, did you find that the music had a different sort of quality to it? Like, did it come out differently than from someone who was classically trained and might take a more formal approach to composing?
I think he did not care about what the critics were going to say about this. Mm-hmm. He knew that he didn't stand a chance against the cognoscenti, the elite. And he wasn't making this album for them anyway. He was making this album for him. I actually recently, really not long ago, saw some interview on YouTube that he gave. And he spoke about this album, Fantasies and Delusions. And he said, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like, this album is the closest album to my heart and something like the closest album to what is me and certainly what is me now. And I think that when he made that decision to leave behind songwriting, knowing that inevitably that he would piss off so many fans and all his record companies and all the people behind him that are waiting, for ka-chings and another hits and this and that, that he was just going to go write, piano music where he's not even playing it himself. It's from a purely superficial career point of view, a type of suicide. But of course, what does he care? I mean, he was on top of the world, and he doesn't need to produce another song if he doesn't want to. He made it so big time in every way. And this was the music that he wanted to write. And so what I think is very endearing about this album is there is an honesty. And to go back to your question, I think that yes, the music may have been different had he known better. There is often something so special and unique about something that is untrained, unformalized. And I think that's what gives this album its charm. To me, not just because I'm the performer, but as objective as I can be now with many years of distance, this is a man, obviously he's in a position to be able to record and afford this, luxury of doing this. But above that, he was driven by real hunger. I mean, like I told you, from that moment that I met him, that's all that he spoke about. So this was fueling him. He wanted to write this music. He needed to get this out. And by the fact that he did not really know what he was doing, but because he's such a naturally gifted musician, it's very possible that had he gone to Juilliard and been trained, maybe the music would be, from an academic point, more relevant. But I think from an emotional point, it hits the point home where many formalized composers may not. And it makes me think about sometimes when I listen to amateur musicians play. A lot of the time, they actually move me much more than professional musicians. And there's a hell of a lot wrong with everything they're doing. I mean, it's sloppy, it's unrhythmical, it's whatever. But these guys, they're playing with everything on their sleeves. Mm-hmm. And they don't give a shit about winning the Van Cliburn competition. Then that's not what they're in it for. They're just there to just make music the best that they possibly can. Mm-hmm. And so that energy comes across. And I think that's the same kind of energy that comes across in these pieces, is a real love and passion for whatever was brewing inside him to come out.
And to finally not have the pressure for the first time in his career to be concerned with hits and record sales and marketing plans. Like you said, he could strictly write from the emotional place in his life and not have to concern himself for the first time with any of that.
And that takes a lot of courage, actually. I know of a few other artists of, let's say, similar success, similar stature, who just get trapped in their success. They're just trapped in trying to fulfill whatever's expected of them or whatever was their last hit, and somehow trying to keep it going. And really, they don't want to do it, but they somehow feel like they ought to. And subconsciously or consciously. And I think it takes a lot of courage, really, besides the passion. But I mean, so much at stake, But I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's like Michael Jordan, leaving basketball to play baseball. I mean, the whole world thought he was fucking crazy.
Right.
Right? He's the greatest basketball player, arguably of all time. He's making gazillions. He's not just his impact on the world, even for people who don't give a shit about basketball. I mean, this guy, Michael Jordan, was immense. And then he goes, you know what? I think I want to play baseball because that's actually what I always wanted to do. That's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. And yes, he was in the position to do that and whatever, but still, it takes incredible courage. I mean, the backlash from his fans, his managers, the sponsors. I mean, you can imagine. It's the same thing with Billy.
That's a great parallel I didn't even think about.
Yeah, now we know what happened with his career, but it's easy to forget that at the time it was more of a risk. Having not put out a pop album in a couple years and people waiting to see what you did next, and to have it not be something academic or something where he was trying to make a point, but instead it was something he wanted to make from an emotional standpoint. So I'm curious, you had said that he played a piece and you said, what's your left hand doing, or there's no counterpoint here. Do you recall how that improved or what changed?
Well, I think that's where I was lucky. That's what was my role, that I could introduce those elements that were lacking, only lacking because it was something that he had not, formally been introduced to. Of course, he knew this music inside out. As I told you, that's all he listens to all day, and he's not stupid. He has a phenomenal ear, so he hears all the counterpoint. He hears all the harmonic juxtapositions and dexterities and all the harmonic modulation possibilities and all the structural things. Of course, he feels that, but he wouldn't know what to. It's like most of us can speak English, but whether we can teach it is another question. Someone came and said, "Could you please teach me English?" We'd be like, "Where does the preposition go?" It's just something that we just have innately within us. So I think classical music is a similar thing. It's innately in him, but of course he doesn't really know how to formalize it, how to externalize it. That's where I came in and would, let's say, I was kind of his translator, so to speak. He would go blah 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 blah, and I would say, "Oh, do you mean like this?" And so that was kind of the nature of our working relationship. And he would play me some things, and then I would say, "Okay, is this what you mean? Is this what you would like?" And then either he would agree or he wouldn't, and he would say, "No, maybe that's a bit too. It's maybe more like this." I had to sort of read. I had to guess, interpret what he wanted to say with it.
And did that also involve helping to kind of string elements together? I know with the pop songwriting, it's a lot of pieces, parts that sometimes get Frankensteined into one song. Was that kind of the situation here as well?
Yes. I mean, I'm trying to remember now, but I'm pretty sure there were some moments where I would say exactly what you just said, that maybe it's too many ingredients in the soup. I mean, the guy was just overflowing with ideas, and he just wanted to put them all in because he was just dying to get this all out. So a lot of the times I think I tried to simplify it, not in the sense of dumbing down, but in the sense of making it, like Beethoven, for example, is very simplistic in the sense it's very motivic. I mean, think of ba 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 bam. I mean, that's just 4 notes, and he builds a whole symphony around that. And that's the simplicity of it. He doesn't have like 1,000 themes and 1,000 ideas. It's just this one thing, and let's drive the point home. I'm sure there was a certain amount of editing on my side. But again, as far as I was concerned, this was his music. He has final say, obviously, but that was always my approach. I never tried to convince him of something, but I cared for him, and I really wanted his music to sound the best possible, with all the best of my knowledge and with love for wanting to make this really the best thing possible. Because I'm a composer myself, I would try my best to sculpt what I thought would be the best interpretation of what he wants. So that was always what I was trying to do, and then see what he has to say.
We often hear Billy say in interviews that a big part of why you were brought in, apart from the arranging part, was that he said he couldn't play it. Can you describe what sort of qualities go into playing a classical piece versus what he was playing? I mean, obviously you can figure the difference between Beethoven and Jerry Lee Lewis pretty easily, but we're all at this point pretty convinced that Billy's a really good pianist. So it's sort of odd to think, well, why couldn't he just play it? So what kind of qualities go into classical playing?
It's probably and I say probably because I'm not an expert on this, but it's probably like the difference between a ballerina and a breakdancer. I'm pretty sure that a ballerina can't really breakdance, and a breakdancer probably can't, run around on their toes.
Right.
They both can do absolutely mind-boggling, death-defying leaps and somersaults. They're both refined and trained in their own ways. I mean, breakdancers, okay, you might think, oh, it's just something that's just done on the street. But those guys, they train for hours and hours, and the things that they do, I mean, you need incredible fitness. And the really great breakdancers, I mean, that's artistic. That's beautiful stuff. That's where I'm lucky in that I was the ballerina in this. Billy's the breakdancer, and he can't, he can't do what I do, and I can't do what he does. For a lot of people, because he is the piano man, of course, a lot of people will be like, who's this little sidekick piano boy? Why does he have to we don't need Robin, Boy Wonder. We just want Batman, give us the real Batman. Who's this, little kid, Asian kid that nobody knows about? And why him, In a way, it's difficult to explain. I wish I had that ballerina breakdancer analogy back then, because I think that would have helped people understand. It's exactly that. For classical playing, you need certain sensitivity, certain nuances. There's all kinds of contrapuntal voicing that happens between the 10 fingers. You play a 4-part Bach fugue. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis, as wonderful as he is, probably wouldn't get past the Bach 2-part invention. But that doesn't mean he's a bad pianist, because,
right.
Most classical pianists wouldn't be able to play Great Balls of Fire. And it's not that Great Balls of Fire is so difficult and that it would be inconceivable for a classical pianist to play it. But there's a certain type of touch and groove and approach that goes with playing rock piano like Little Richard. I mean, it's not just like a given that you can just play the piano while you're, smashing the top keys with your foot. It's
right.
It's a particular touch and talent.
Yeah.
And style.
It sounds like a lot of the arranging and things happened over time. And so it's interesting to hear that you guys had to send tapes to each other and call, before the internet really took off. What was it like in the recording studio? We're really used to hearing about Billy sculpting so much in the studio. Was everything pretty much set by the time you were ready to record?
If there were, they were minimal changes during the recording session. I think there were one or two things, but probably by that point, they were more questions of interpretation. And, although they were pieces that I had worked on inside out with him over, a period of 18 months, now that we are actually in the Colosseum, I mean, not the Colosseum, but you know what I mean, like actually in the moment.
Yeah.
And he's like sitting in the studio, and this is it, take 1, take 2, it's going down. I think probably he had that perspective to hear it and go, wait a minute, I think I actually want it more like this. So there were a few times when he would either come down or for the speakers say, can it be, a bit like this or whatever. So there was still a collaborative process in the recording session. That being said, he was such a respectful, graceful sweetie, and he basically just said, this is your show. He had so much trust in me, and it's actually incredible because I had no real recording experience. I had not that much, performing experience. And so the fact that he really trusted me to just sail this boat. And so normally he's, used to being behind the driving seat himself, but he was just very happy to be in the back seat. And sometimes I would ask him, hey, what do you think of this? How is this? He'd be like, hey, if it's good for you, it's good for me. That was kind of very much his attitude, which was, looking back, really admirable, because I know so many artists who are total control freaks, who would want to, they're the Stanley Kubricks of this world, who would just absolutely want to have every single millisecond perfectly framed and timed. And he's completely the opposite. He's just like, go for it, man. If you want to do another take, if you think it needs another take, do it. So very lucky.
Do you remember how long the recording process was?
Oh, we had luxury schedule. Those were the days. Well, I mean, that was 2001, and there was still money in the recording business. Obviously, this is a Billy Joel project, so there's a budget. We had a very comfortable 5 days in total. I could have even had a sixth and seventh day if I wanted. And that's almost unheard of today. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. I mean, now it would be like, you have 3 hours to get this done, And if you can't, there's a whole line of other people who could do it in 3 hours. So, it was super luxury. And the team from Sony Classical, Stephen Epstein and Richard King, they were just a dream team to work with. So for me, it's like, it can only go downhill from here, I mean, it just, you start off so like up there. I mean, it was an amazing experience.
And the studio was in the city?
No, actually, that was the one thing that I can't say I put my foot down. I mean, you don't put your foot down with Billy, but I was quite clear about that. I felt that this album should not be recorded in some studio, that it should actually be recorded in a concert hall in Vienna. He has so many ties to Vienna. We met in Vienna. His father lives in Vienna. He wrote a song called Vienna. And the music that he's trying to emulate, all of them lived or passed through Vienna. Beethoven is Vienna. So what are we doing recording in some place in Manhattan, as great as it might be?
Right.
You want this to be a classical album, let's go to the Mozart Hall in the Vienna Concerthaus, where there's a rich tradition, where, Brahms and Mahler and so on and so forth, and record it where it belongs. Fortunately for me, the whole Columbia team flew over and we did it in Vienna.
That's another testament too, that he was open to even that suggestion.
Yeah. Maybe now if I suggested, probably, they'd say, well, who are you kidding,
Right.
You've got 3 minutes to do it in the toilet.
Was that common for classical pieces like that to be recorded in concert halls?
It's, I would say it's fairly common. Yeah. Yes, I mean, some recordings, of course, would take place in studios or different environments. Some of them would be recorded in churches. But if you looked, on the back covers of a lot of LPs and CDs and actually looked where it was recorded, a lot of them were concert halls.
You spoke a lot about how this was a passion project for Billy, that he wasn't as concerned with pleasing the critics or charting. At the same time, though, the album did go to #1 on the classical charts. Were you expecting such a strong reaction to the album?
Honestly, no. I imagined just arithmetically that probably it would sell quite well. Obviously not selling well on the stratosphere that normally his albums would sell. Mm-hmm. But I thought even if 1% of his record buying fans would buy this album, I mean, that's already quite a lot. I'm sure from the recording company perspective, it was not a success, obviously. But I was definitely surprised. I mean, from one side, not surprised, because obviously it carries the name Billy Joel. But from another side, surprised also that it did so well, because it could have been really, really shitted on and really, really criticized. Somehow it was not scathed, and like I think it got a certain amount of respect, even though of course there were comments in the press that But you know what the critics are like. I mean, I think even if a critic loves something, they would have to write something bad about it, because that's what they are. They're a critic. They have to criticize. Do you know the famous joke? What does a music critic and a gynecologist have in common? They're both looking for problems where others are looking for pleasure.
Oh, that's good.
So, right? Those people that listen to Fantasies and Delusions or River of Dreams or whatever, they're looking for pleasure. And the critics, they're just, they're not.
Initial reaction when I think a lot of fans maybe have seemed surprised by things. To me, it's like, well, then maybe they haven't been listening so closely to his albums over the years, because I feel like there's been elements of what this became throughout. I think it's always been there.
Always been there. And if you go even back to his very first album, Cold Spring Harbor, there's a piece called Nocturne, I believe. And it's just pure piano, Chopin, John Field-esque writing. Yep. And I think, I wasn't around when Cold Spring Harbor came out, but I'm sure for a lot of people, they must have gone, eh? Like, hearing She's Got Away, and, and then getting to this one track where it's like, oh, wait, is the singer not coming in? I mean, it's just very unusual for any kind of singer-songwriter album. I can't think, you guys would know better, but I can't think of, a Simon Garfunkel instrumental track or whatever, Earth, Wind and Fire, just you know what I mean? It's like, where's the voice? And then also the music is not really poppy and funky and kind of like, ooh, what's this? So already in his first album, he was doing that. And he's the first one to admit in his talks and lectures how a lot of the things he stole or borrowed from classical music. Leningrad is based on the Schumann Piano Concerto. The song This Night as the chorus actually quotes Beethoven. Pretty much note for note.
Right.
So yes, it was there all the time. He had Itzhak Perlman play on the Downeaster Alexa. So, as you said, from the very beginning, he wasn't really running away from it. It was always there.
The more we've been digging deeper into these records and songs, more so than a lot of other pop artists of the day, the songs were so complex, but wrapped in a ear-pleasing pop song. Like, there are so many layers to what he was doing musically that was not common in a lot of pop music then.
Absolutely right. Think about the opening of Honesty. That could easily have been some Bruckner or Mahler something, modulation. There's some very, a lot of his things like, and so it goes, for example, has tastes of sort of Copland or Samuel Barber. Again, he had a lot of this classical influence in his pieces. And look, he also would play classical music through the speakers before he would come on. And did you know that Phil Ramone, his producer on many of those albums, was actually a classical violinist who studied at Juilliard with Galamin, one of the greatest violin teachers. And so I'm sure that of course, Phil was very well known and respected producer, but I'm sure, especially with Billy, there must have been some kind of special relationship there because they both could hook into the classical music. And I'm sure
they understood that through line.
Yeah. And I bet Phil had a lot of input also because of his classical background.
Oh, absolutely. I've heard the stories of the guys say, they referred to him as Uncle Phil, but they said he was a band member. He was equally responsible for shaping these songs as anyone.
And like you said, as influenced as Billy was by classical music, he didn't have that formal training in it. And so he had a more organic approach. When we spoke with Bradshaw Lee, who was a longtime engineer with Billy and Phil Ramone, he talked about how Phil knew about theory and had formal training, but when he was speaking about something he was recording, like he didn't use academic language. It was more emotional about the song. So it's interesting then to think that they both had that classical background, but they didn't use it in the studio.
Well, like I was kind of trying to say earlier, sometimes an informal approach bring something not only honest and emotional, but also something original. Think of like Tarantino's early films. I mean, I don't think the guy went to film school. He just watched a shitload of videos because he worked in a video rental store. That's all he did all day. He just watched videos. Yes. And he loved film. He just loves it. So his first 2-3 films were so fresh because they came from someone who didn't have to adhere to any rules of filmmaking. He just made it up as he went along. And there's plenty of examples like that, especially a lot of people who are self-taught, they're the ones in the end that actually produce something that actually becomes a game changer for the next generation. You know what I think is a big shame? Well, there's two things that I think are a big shame. Is one that, and I'm speaking purely as a selfish fan now, that Billy never did more covers of other people's songs, because I love the way he sings other people's material.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, there are some examples that we have, and of course, at concerts sometimes he would do that. I, of course, had the fortune to hear him in sound checks and also hear him at home or whatever, and he would just reel off songs by whoever, and he's also so good at even imitating the voice. He's so good at changing the quality of his voice. He knew so many songs. Gilbert and Sullivan, Frank Sinatra, I mean, whatever. And he could perform these fantastically. And another thing that I think is a big shame for all of us is that he never did more comedic stuff. Because the guy is hilarious. I don't know if you guys have ever seen him when he's doing like questions and answers at universities and stuff like that. He's a stand-up. He's a stand-up comic. He's hilarious. Again, he was always shy and reluctant to be in front of the camera and to do Saturday Night Live skits and stuff like that. But he's brilliant. I mean, I know he's brilliant because he did a skit with us. I have a duo with a violinist called Alexei Gudesman. We have a duo called Gudesman and Joo. He knows about my comedy side, let's say, my humorous side. And I do shows where I mix classical music with humor. And he's followed that over the years. Because when I was working on Fantasies and Delusions, I was also developing my classical music comedy act. So he would even come to downtown Village and see me doing that stuff. So he's seen the development of that. Even at his wedding, Alexei and I performed for him some of our stuff. So he was very familiar with that and very supportive. And when we had our Carnegie Hall concert in 2012, he actually said, "Oh, guys, what do you think about me jumping on stage with you?" And we were like, "Fuck, bring it on.
Right?
Let's do it." And I think that's actually quite incredible that he did that. He normally would not put himself in that situation. Actually, one can see it on YouTube. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's
I have. It's great.
Oh, you have, yeah. He's brilliant. And there's even some lines that he even wrote himself. Like, I guess it must be a case of pianist envy and stuff like this. He's brilliant. I think as an actor and as a stage animal, as a charismatic performer, there's so much there. He also even did something for us which he never does. My friend and I, we founded a startup called Music Traveler. Besides being our first ambassador and supporter, he did a little ad with us where he's being silly, screwing around. He's funny. I mean, he's very good. He comes off great, I'll never forget, I went to 2 Rainforest concerts in a row. These are concerts that are organized by Sting for his Rainforest Foundation. Billy Joel, of course, regularly appears in those. And I went 2 years in a row where Billy was performing. The who's who is there. I mean, everybody's performing from Elton, Madonna, Joe Cocker, etc., etc. I mean, it's just 3 hours of like, wow. And then in the meantime, you've got all kinds of personalities coming on and giving speeches, John McEnroe, Sidney Poitier, whatever. I'll never forget the first concert where there were all these legends performing. I like James Teller and I like Elton John. I like a lot of these musicians that were performing. But there were 2 people that actually like owned the stage. And that was Billy Joel and Joe Cocker. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, for me, that was enlightening, because I was just there as like, a nobody, and just seeing just one after the other, legends coming on one after the other. And then somehow feeling that they're as charismatic as they are, and as much as I've admired them, they didn't somehow own the stage. Billy walked on, and he's not tall in stature at all. As he would say himself, I'm just a small, stocky Jewish guy, But he just the stage, and this has nothing to do with my relationship to him. Right. It's just like, wow, bam. And same with Joe Cocker as well. And it was interesting that those two stood out for me. Billy just has a certain strength, that gravity of this force of nature that he just comes on, and it's just, you're just magnetized. You're just glued. Whether he's talking or playing or whatever. There's a logic to the madness, why he sells out Madison Square Garden repeatedly. I mean, I think he's played there over 100 times now, something ridiculous.
One thing I want to ask too before we wrapped up, do you have anything that you've been working on currently that you want to share with our listeners?
Oh, well, I mean, one thing about Corona is that you have time.
That's true.
There's nowhere to go, nobody to meet, no restaurants to go. So I've had a bit more time on my hands to compose. That's something I love doing. Actually, I wrote a piece for Billy's child Remy. When he turned 1 year old, I was invited to the birthday party. What do you take, as a present to a kid that has everything besides, already having siblings and all the hand-me-downs or whatever? So, I mean, what can I give that's going to possibly... So I just thought, well, I can at least write a piece. That's something that at least you can't find in Toys R Us. And so I wrote a piece called Rémi. And as you probably know, Rémi is actually a musical, Rémi, And what was interesting was, and I didn't expect this, was when I played the piece for Billy, because actually Rémi was sleeping, so I had to record myself playing it. He actually said, "Oh, Rémi, that never occurred to me."
Really?
He never made that musical association with the solfège, with the do re mi. So yeah, and the whole piece is kind of based on re mi re mi re mi re, and it's it's like a 1 minute piece. So that's some. Well, that was of course before Corona, but I just realized that, and that piece will be published soon on Universal Edition. So. Yeah, of course, it'll be dedicated to Rémi. Everybody will be like, who's Rémi? But if they watch this, they'll know.
They'll know. When this album came out, I was 21, so my head wasn't there yet with it. 20-year-old rock kid who didn't quite understand the progression there. And I tell you, as the years have gone, I'm 41 now, it's grown on me considerably, and it's a real treat to listen to these years later. It's a great work of art, and I'm really glad he tapped you to be a part of it.
Well, obviously it was, one of the most epic moments of my life for sure. I mean, it's something I'll never forget. That goes without saying. There's many things that are attached to this album that get a lot of credibility even still today. Just that whole quality of production behind it. I get a lot of sound engineer nerds who have come across it. They find me, they're like, man, the sound on the album, it's like one of the best piano sounds. And they're not making a backhanded compliment to me. They're actually talking about the technical production of the sound. So it gets a lot of adulation from all different corners. As much as some of the stuck-up nose critics try to put it down, I do get several people that are like serious classical maestri loving the album and really saluting him. And he's been such an ambassador for classical music. It's an honor as a classical musician to have had this relationship and friendship with him.
Well, Jack and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat with us today. It's been such a treat to hear your part in all of this and your experiences. So thanks again. It was so much fun.
Yeah, this has really been a really insightful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Looking forward to seeing it and hearing. Take care, guys.
All right. Were we right? Was that not a great interview? Was that not a great conversation? I still think it is.
Yeah, man, even after listening back to it, I'm still kind of breathing deep like, okay, we made it. And I tell you what, he just made us feel so comfortable and at ease right out of the gate. And he was just so personable and so funny that it was like talking to somebody you've known for years.
Yeah. And we've had such a great run of interviews so far. To say this almost feels like we're saying it at the expense of all the other amazing guests we've had, and they have all been great. This was just a different kind of conversation. It's a good opportunity to really just think about, in our first year, all the people we've had the great pleasure of speaking with, from Mike Del Judas to Malcolm Gold, Liberty DeVito himself, engineer Bradshaw Lee, Andy Gilmartin, Sue Stegmeyer, and of course Michael Cavanaugh a few episodes ago.
There's so many people either directly connected with Billy or even indirectly connected with Billy who have been touched by his music, and hearing all of these stories come together in one place, I just feel really fortunate and grateful that we've been able to be tasked with curating and collecting all of these great stories just to have an audio document of the impact Billy Joel has had on so many.
So now it's your turn. We really want to know what you thought of this conversation. And I'm really curious now, if anybody went back and listened to that album again. You know, if you're like us, you listened to it, you enjoyed it. When we were younger, we didn't have the head for it, so it kind of collected a little bit of dust. We've since dusted it off ourselves. And if you've done the same, we're really curious if hearing some of the stories behind it has given you a different perspective or a new appreciation for the recording.
I'll tell you, me personally, listening to it in 2021 as opposed to 2001 when it came out, I really can hear much more of a connection between this album and the pop records that came out prior. There's really more similarity than I ever gave credit before.
I'm going to have to give it another listen now just to listen for that. Also, really? It's been 20 years? We're getting old, man. This ain't cool. That was half my life ago. I don't like to think like that.
I know, right? It's been a long road waiting.
But yeah, there it is. Shoot us an email, glasshousespodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, and you can also find us all over the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you just search Glass House's Billy Joel Podcast, you will find us there. Your comments, your likes, your shares all mean a lot to us. And the comments especially, and the emails, because we love hearing your thoughts and your stories. And it sparks some great conversation that Jack and I don't always think of on our own. Just hearing your experiences. And it's so great to know that there's others out there who have had these shared connections. So please keep those coming.
I don't know what it is, but I love when people say something like, I saw him for the first time in '84. You know, just something about that's real cool. Because, you know, best we can do is watch the videotapes. You know, just hearing a little something from somebody who was there, it's fun. You know, it's really something. And if you're one of the 14.8% of people that listen to us on Apple Podcasts, if you could be so kind as to give us a positive review and a 5-star rating, we really appreciate it. Not only does it boost our frail egos, but the more 5-star ratings and positive reviews we get, the more of an indication it is for Apple Podcasts to put us in front of more listeners. So it's always a fast, easy, and free way to help support us.
Absolutely. And, you know, I just want to say how grateful we are for all of you for listening. You know, Jack and I enjoy talking Billy all the time anyway. It's a lot of fun for us, but it's such a treat to know that we're reaching this Billy Joel community, and you keep listening, we'll keep recording. That's just as simple as that. We've got so much to go here that we can't wait to see what unfolds. And with that, we're going to wrap this one up. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We will see you again in a couple weeks.
We'll see you next time.